The galactic flagship Axiomatic hung in low Earth orbit, a gleaming testament to the Quantar Collective's mastery over the cosmos. It was a sight to behold, vast, seamless, and shimmering like liquid metal as it caught the sunlight. From within its walls, a species renowned for its analytical prowess prepared to execute their mission. The Quantar Collective was no ordinary spacefaring race. They were intellectual supremacists, devoted to cataloging and understanding every sentient species they encountered. For eons, their advanced scanners and biocognitive arrays had dissected civilizations with precision, reducing entire cultures to data points and behavioral matrices. Earth, they assumed, would be no different. I was at the diplomatic station on the outskirts of New York City when the Axiomatic arrived. From the ground we could see its reflection, rippling across the oceans and cityscapes, a spectacle that stirred awe and apprehension among humanity. For me, the moment was surreal. I was one of the chosen liaisons, trained in xenolinguistics and cross-cultural diplomacy. When the Quantar made contact, I was ready, or so I believed. Their descent was an exercise in alien elegance. Unlike the clumsy landings of early human spacecraft or the theatrical arrivals depicted in our movies, the Quantar touched down silently, their shimmering forms emerging from light rather than mechanical doors. Each being floated inches above the ground, their metallic robes merging with the faint glow of their elongated, luminous bodies. There was something unnerving about them, an aura of detachment, as though they were less a species and more a living embodiment of cold intellect. The leader among them introduced itself as Archanalyzer Vaughn. Its voice was not spoken, but transmitted directly into our minds, resonant yet devoid of warmth. "We are the Quantar Collective. Your species intrigues us. Prepare for analysis. Go." Their intent was clear from the start. This wasn't a diplomatic visit. They hadn't come to negotiate or exchange knowledge. They had come to dissect us. Not physically, but existentially. Their scanners, no larger than a human hand but brimming with energy that shimmered like starlight, word to life. These devices, I later learned, were capable of probing neural pathways, deconstructing genetic codes, and unraveling the cultural fabrics of entire species. To them, understanding was domination, and Earth was their latest conquest. At first, their approach seemed almost routine. They began scanning the area, their devices darting through the crowded streets of New York City. Humans, busy with their lives, barely noticed the alien visitors or their intricate instruments. A scanner paused before a food vendor grilling kebabs, analyzing the chemical composition of the spices wafting through the air. Another hovered near a street performer, recording the rhythmic clapping of an audience as the performer juggled flaming batons. But something was off. Braun's calm exterior betrayed a flicker of confusion. "Your species exhibits profound contradictions," it mused. "Technological sophistication coexists with primal instinct. Individual identity vies with collective ambition. Explain." I struggled to suppress a smile. "Humans are complicated," I replied, choosing my words carefully. Vron didn't respond. Instead, it gestured for the scanners to intensify their efforts. The devices buzzed and darted, their light growing brighter as they delved deeper into the nuances of our existence. Yet, the more they scanned, the more puzzled the Quantar seemed. The Quantar's first round of analysis yielded little beyond confusion. For a species so assured of their intellectual superiority, this was an unprecedented setback. Archanalyzer Vron's sleek form twitched with subtle agitation, its metallic tendrils flexing as if channeling frustration. The initial scans of human physiology had been straightforward, carbon-based organisms with a curious mix of strength, fragility, and adaptability. But when their devices shifted to assessing our behavior, culture, and motivations, they hit a wall. The plaza where we stood was alive with the chaotic rhythm of human life. New York City was always like this, a cacophony of sounds, colors, and scents blending into a vibrant tapestry. To the Quantar, it must have been overwhelming. Their scanners floated about, capturing data from everything around them. One paused near a street artist painting an expansive mural on the side of a building. The artwork was bold and abstract, with swirls of color and jagged shapes that seemed to tell a story no one could entirely decipher. "What purpose does this serve?" Ron asked, its voice tinged with the faintest edge of impatience. "It's art," I replied, watching the artist carefully add a splash of crimson to her canvas. Vron's tendrils quivered. "Define its function." "The exercise exam inquiry process." I smirked, knowing full well that my answer wouldn't satisfy them. "It doesn't have to function. It exists because it brings joy, provokes thought, or expresses something the artist feels." The scanner examining the mural emitted a faint, dissonant hum. It was struggling, trying to map the chaotic strokes and clashing colors into a logical framework. I could almost hear the device's frustration as it gave up and zipped away toward a group of teenagers laughing on a bench. Meanwhile, another scanner had locked onto a food truck selling tacos. Its mechanical tendrils hovered over the sizzling grill, analyzing the proteins and spices with surgical precision. A man in line took a bite of his taco, his face lighting up with satisfaction. The scanner twitched, its lens zooming in on the man's expression. "What is that?" Vron asked, its tone sharp. I tilted my head. "What is what?" Allowed the audience to feel impressed, while maintaining the usual background sound of her previous duration, performing an exercise known as turmeric. The expression. "He's enjoying his food," I said, suppressing a chuckle. "It's called happiness." The scanner's hum grew louder, then abruptly ceased. The device froze for a moment before retreating, its lights dimmed as if in defeat. The Quantar's confusion only deepened as the day wore on. Their scanners were calibrated to process logic, patterns, and quantifiable data. But when faced with something as intangible as human emotion or creativity, they faltered. One device attempted to analyze a woman singing to her baby, her voice soft and soothing. It recorded the melody and broke down the acoustic waves. But when the baby cooed in response, the scanner emitted a spark and plummeted to the ground. Vron turned to me, its metallic visage unreadable but undeniably tense. "Your species operates on principles that defy reason. This is problematic." "Internal bleeding won't help in the slightest," Dr. Braun said. I shrugged. "Welcome to humanity." The arc analyzer remained silent for several long moments, its glowing form almost imperceptibly dimmed. For all their technology and intellect, the Quantar were discovering a fundamental truth about humans. We were not a puzzle to be solved, but a contradiction to be embraced. And their most advanced scanners were utterly out of their depth. The Quantar's scanners continued their relentless attempts to decode humanity, but their progress was anything but smooth. Their initial optimism had given way to an uncharacteristic unease. The devices, so reliable in the analysis of other species, were now stuttering in their work. Data streams overlapped and contradicted one another. Algorithms, built to classify the motivations of entire civilizations, faltered and failed. The chaos of human nature wasn't just an obstacle, it was a disaster for their technology. As I watched Vron and its team recalibrate their machines, I couldn't help but feel a pang of amusement. It was almost poetic. Here were these self-proclaimed masters of understanding, undone by something as simple and inexplicable as a smile. One scanner had focused on a group of skydivers preparing to jump from a small aircraft. The device hovered around them, analyzing their equipment, physiological responses, and the gravitational variables of their upcoming descent. But when one of the skydivers grinned and shouted, "Let's do this!" the scanner's hum turned erratic. It backed away slightly, then darted forward, as if trying to probe deeper into the phenomenon. Braun, observing through a remote interface, voiced its confusion aloud. These humans willingly risked death for a brief experience. Why? I considered the question. It's not about the risk, it's about the feeling. Adrenaline, freedom, exhilaration. You can't measure that with a scanner. Braun's form flickered, a subtle indicator of its irritation. Your terms are vague. Define exhilaration. Exultation and isolation, sadness and voidance, said Braun. It's something you feel in your gut, not your head. A rush, a thrill. The ARC analyzer turned its focus back to the scanner, which was now struggling to process the mixed signals of fear and excitement radiating from the skydivers. It emitted a harsh beep and powered down, a clear sign of overload. Other scanners fared no better. One drifted into a classroom where a teacher was explaining the concept of infinity to a group of children. The scanner recorded the equations on the board, the movement of the teacher's hands, and the attentive gazes of the students. But when a child raised their hand and asked, "Why does infinity never end?" the scanner jolted slightly, its lights dimming. It couldn't process the philosophical undertones of the question. Another device wandered into a park, zeroing in on a couple dancing to the music of a street musician. The scanner analyzed their movements, synchronized yet imperfect, as they swayed to the rhythm. It measured the tempo of the music and the biological reactions of the dancers, elevated heart rates, dilated pupils, endorphin levels spiking. But when the couple laughed and spun together, the scanner wobbled midair and retreated, clearly unable to reconcile the joy it was witnessing. Braun's frustration grew with each failure. Your species operates on contradictory impulses, cooperation and conflict, logic and irrationality. These dichotomies are incompatible with efficient analysis. I leaned against a railing, watching as another scanner malfunctioned near a toddler who was gleefully stomping in a puddle. Maybe that's the point. Humans aren't meant to be analyzed. We just are. The Quantar, so accustomed to understanding everything, were floundering. Their most sophisticated tools couldn't handle something as fundamental as human joy, curiosity, or love. It was as if their technology had reached the limits of what logic could comprehend, and humanity stood on the other side, laughing and living in a way no machine could ever replicate. The Quantar, ever determined, refused to concede defeat. Their scanners may have failed to decode humanity's essence, but they weren't without other strategies. If raw data couldn't provide the answers, then direct interaction would. That was their logic. Vron summoned an emergency council aboard the Axiomatic, its sleek chambers brimming with glowing panels and pulsating conduits that seemed to breathe with the ship. "We will employ interviews," Braun declared, its tone resolute. "Perhaps their responses will shed light on their perplexing behavior. We will understand them." It began the next morning. Groups of humans were escorted to a neutral space within the diplomatic station, a setting deliberately chosen to put them at ease. It was designed like a warm cafe, with comfortable chairs and steaming mugs of coffee, tea, and cocoa set on small tables. I sat nearby, observing the Quantar as they interacted with their first human subjects. The question started simple, the kind that might yield predictable answers from a more straightforward species. "What motivates your daily actions?" they asked a scientist. "Curiosity," she replied without hesitation. The Quantar noted this. "Define curiosity. What quantifiable benefit does it yield?" The scientist smiled. "It's not always about benefits. Curiosity is a hunger to know, to understand things, just for the sake of it." The scanner translating her words faltered, its glow dimming briefly. Braun's form stiffened. "This pursuit of knowledge without direct benefit is inefficient. Does it not consume resources unnecessarily?" "Sometimes it does," the scientist admitted. "But it's also how we've made our greatest discoveries. If we only pursued what was immediately useful, we'd never get anywhere truly new." This answer left Braun silent, though I could sense its growing frustration. Another human, a bartender, was questioned next. "What drives you to interact with others on a daily basis?" He shrugged, cleaning an invisible glass out of habit. "People need connection. I'm just part of that." "Exercising is great for people with depression," he said. Braun's metallic visage tilted slightly. "Connection? For what purpose?" "Out. All out," the boy said. The bartender chuckled. "Purpose? Sometimes it's just a conversation over a drink. Sometimes it's a smile. It's not always about the why. It's about being there." The scanner emitted a low whine, as though overwhelmed by the nebulous nature of the answer. The Quantar persisted. They questioned a teacher about her work. "I help kids learn and grow," she explained. "To what end?" Braun pressed. "To help them find their paths in life." "Define their paths." The teacher gave a bemused smile. "That's the thing. I don't define it for them. They have to figure it out themselves. I just guide them along the way." This answer, too, seemed to push the Quantar's understanding to its limits. They were accustomed to civilizations where hierarchies and paths were rigidly defined, where every action served a purpose aligned with the collective. Humanity's individuality, our insistence on creating meaning rather than adhering to a predefined one, was baffling to them. When it was my turn to speak with Ron directly, I could see the strain in its glowing tendrils. "Your people defy categorization," it said. "You embrace uncertainty. You pursue what is intangible. You prioritize inefficiencies." "That's what makes us human," I replied. "We're not machines. We don't need every action or feeling to fit neatly into a purpose. Sometimes we just live." The arch-analyzer fell silent for a long moment. Then, almost reluctantly, it responded. "This lack of structure is destabilizing. We must understand it further." They didn't realize that the more they tried to analyze us, the further they moved from understanding. For all their technological prowess, the Quantar were unprepared for the depth and unpredictability of the human soul. The Quantar's scanners and interviews were failing to yield any coherent model of humanity, and their frustration was beginning to show. The pristine efficiency of their mission was unraveling, piece by piece. Their devices, once heralded as the pinnacle of analytical technology, were behaving erratically, overloaded by the contradictions and ambiguities of human behavior. On the third day of their study, a scanner attempted to decode a stand-up comedy show in Brooklyn. The comedian, a wiry man with sharp wit, had the audience roaring with laughter as he recounted absurd anecdotes about everyday life. The scanner focused on the comedian's movements, recording the inflection in his voice and the rhythmic timing of his jokes. It also monitored the audience, measuring their laughter in terms of volume, duration, and even their physiological responses. But when it tried to cross-reference the data, it faltered. Why did the same words that elicited such joy in one setting fall flat in another? What was the precise mechanism behind humor? The more it tried to calculate the answer, the more erratic its readings became. Finally, with a sharp pop and a flash of sparks, the scanner malfunctioned completely, crashing to the floor in a heap of smoldering circuitry. Vron, who had been observing through a remote interface, let out a sound that I could only describe as a sigh. It turned to me, its tendrils twitching. "Explain this phenomenon." "Humor," I asked, barely suppressing a smile. "It's not something you can analyze. It's context, timing, shared understanding, and a little bit of the absurd. It's as much about how it makes you feel as what it actually is." "That is unacceptable," Varan replied sharply. "Every phenomenon must have a logic, a framework. Humor is no exception." I spread my hands. Good luck with that. Elsewhere, the scanners were encountering similar problems. One attempted to analyze a culinary competition on television, where chefs created intricate dishes under tight deadlines. The device cataloged every ingredient, every technique, and every reaction from the judges. But when the host announced the winning dish, the scanner faltered. Why had this particular dish won? Its flavor profile wasn't objectively superior in nutritional value or molecular complexity. The answer lay in subjective elements: texture, presentation, and the chef's personal story, none of which the scanner could quantify. Another device had wandered into a hospital room where a family gathered around a recovering patient. The scanner documented their interactions, noting the shared smiles, the clasped hands, the gentle touches. It recorded the words spoken, but it couldn't decode the undercurrent of love and relief that filled the room. For all its advanced algorithms, it couldn't comprehend the unspoken bond that tied those people together. Each failure seemed to wear on the Quantar. Their tools, designed to break down the complexities of any sentient species, were being outmatched by the unpredictable, emotional, and deeply personal nature of humanity. Their frustration culminated when a scanner attempting to observe a spontaneous street parade exploded in a shower of sparks after being overwhelmed by the joyous chaos. "We are being broken," Vron admitted in a private meeting with me later that evening. Its voice, usually resonant and calm, was strained. "Your people's behavior destabilizes our systems. We cannot process such inconsistency." I leaned back in my chair, watching the ARC analyzer with a mix of sympathy and pride. "Maybe you're trying too hard. Not everything needs to be understood. Some things are just meant to be experienced." Vron didn't respond immediately. Instead, it stared out the window at the city lights below, flickering and shifting in ways that defied patterns. I could tell it was grappling with a truth that Quantar had never faced. Not everything in the universe could be neatly categorized or reduced to data. Some things, like humanity itself, were beyond understanding. The Quantar's mission was unraveling faster than even Vron seemed able to comprehend. Their scanners, algorithms, and entire approach to understanding had reached their breaking point. More than their tools, it was their mindset, their fundamental belief that everything could be reduced to logic and data, that was failing them. I could see it in the way Vron's form flickered more often, its once imposing demeanor now weighed down by what I could only describe as existential fatigue. They had come expecting simplicity, a species to dissect, categorize, and catalog like so many others. What they found was an enigma. And worse for them, an enigma that refused to fit any of their parameters. Despite their growing frustration, the Quantar doubled down, insisting that understanding was within their grasp. One of their last great efforts centered on what they called the emotional nexus. They had identified emotions as the key to our incomprehensibility and believed that isolating and analyzing them individually might yield results. Ron gathered a diverse group of humans, placing them in controlled scenarios designed to provoke specific emotional responses: joy, fear, anger, sadness, and love. The first test involved joy. The humans were brought into a room filled with puppies, balloons, and lively music. The Quantar's scanners buzzed around, measuring the participants' laughter and smiles, their body language, and their brain activity. But the readings were inconsistent. Some people laughed loudly, others smiled quietly, and one person began tearing up, not out of sadness, but because they were overwhelmed by the sheer happiness of the moment. The scanners couldn't reconcile these variations. Next came fear. Participants were exposed to simulated dangers, virtual cliffs, roaring predators, and other carefully crafted scenarios. The results were even more baffling. Some participants screamed and jumped back, while others froze in place. A few even laughed nervously, their fear blending with amusement in a way that made the scanners malfunction yet again. Anger and sadness fared no better. One participant, who was meant to experience anger instead, broke into laughter, saying the simulation was too ridiculous to take seriously. Another, placed in a situation meant to provoke sadness, responded with quiet resolve rather than tears. The Quantar couldn't understand how the same stimuli could produce such wildly different responses. The final test was love, and it was here that their efforts fell apart completely. A young couple was invited into the room, holding hands and exchanging affectionate glances. The scanners swarmed around them, recording their gestures, measuring their heart rates, and analyzing the neurochemical activity in their brains. But no matter how much data they collected, the Quantar couldn't grasp the essence of what they were witnessing. "What is the source of this connection?" Braun asked me, its voice tinged with something dangerously close to desperation. "There isn't a single source," I replied. "Love isn't just one thing. It's a combination of trust, affection, shared experiences, and a million little things you can't measure." Vraun's tendrils quivered. "An unquantifiable phenomenon." It cannot be. But it was. The Quantar's scanners short-circuited one by one as they attempted to process the couple's interactions. Finally, Vraun gave the command to shut them down. The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time, the Quantar were forced to confront the limits of their knowledge. They had sought to understand humanity on their terms, through logic and precision, and had failed utterly. What they hadn't realized was that understanding humanity required something they lacked entirely: the ability to feel. The Quantar were defeated, though not in the way they had imagined defeat could come. They hadn't been met with weapons or hostility, nor had their systems been hacked or sabotaged. Instead, they had encountered something they couldn't quantify, categorize, or comprehend. Humanity had overwhelmed them with the unmeasurable: emotions, contradictions, and the chaos of being alive. The Arc Analyzer Vraun stood at the edge of the observation deck, its glowing form dimmer than before. Outside, the sprawling city of New York stretched out in all its unpredictable brilliance. Cars moved in chaotic patterns below, their honks and sirens blending with the murmur of the crowds. Neon lights flickered on as dusk fell, painting the sideline with vibrant, ever-changing hues. To the Quantar, it must have seemed like a living organism, pulsing with an unstructured vitality they would never fully understand. "You are an anomaly," Vraun finally said, breaking the heavy silence. Its voice lacked its usual mechanical confidence, replaced by something more subdued. Maybe, I replied, standing beside it, or maybe we're just different. It is more than difference, Vron insisted. Your species operates on principles that defy the fundamental logic of existence. You embrace inefficiency, inconsistency, and irrationality. Yet, you endure. We do more than endure, I said with a faint smile. We thrive. Because of those things, not despite them. Vron turned to me, its glowing eyes narrowing. Explain. Riskier. I took a deep breath, searching for the right words. We're not perfect. We make mistakes, we argue, we fail. But it's in those moments that we grow. Every contradiction, every messy feeling, every irrational choice, it all adds up to who we are. You see chaos, but we see potential. We don't need to have all the answers. Sometimes it's enough just to ask the questions and see where they lead. The arch-analyzer was silent for a long time, its form flickering faintly as though its very essence was processing my words. We have encountered countless civilizations, it said at last. Each one could be understood, its patterns deciphered, its essence reduced to a cohesive model. But your unpredictability destabilizes even our most advanced systems. This is unacceptable. Or maybe it's exactly what makes us worth understanding, I countered. The flicker in Vron's glow intensified. We cannot comprehend you, nor can we control you. This lack of understanding threatens the very foundation of our purpose. And maybe that's the lesson, I said. Not everything is meant to be understood. Sometimes, the mystery is the point. Vron turned back to the window, its posture almost contemplative. For the first time, I saw something that could almost be called doubt. The Quantar had always believed that knowledge was power, that understanding was the key to control. But humanity had shown them that some things, some beings, were beyond control, beyond reduction. The following day, the Axiomatic prepared for departure. The Quantar didn't announce their decision to leave. They simply began withdrawing their scanners, their glowing tendrils of light fading from the streets. As they ascended back into orbit, the people of Earth watched with curiosity and relief, unaware of just how deeply they had unsettled their visitors. Before the ship disappeared from view, Vron spoke to me one last time. Its voice transmitted directly into my mind. Your species is an enigma we cannot solve. Perhaps that is your greatest strength, and our greatest weakness. Montguy. And just like that, the Quantar were gone. For all their technology and intellect, they had been humbled by the simplest truth of all. Humanity wasn't a problem to be solved. We were a story to be told, a song to be sung, a mystery to be lived. And as I watched the sky return to its natural calm, I couldn't help but smile. Some answers, after all, were better left unknown.